Welcome to the review and breakdown, Superman and Lois fans. This is for episode 4 of season 3. Future Boba here. I know I said episode 4 right now. I mean episode 5, obviously. I just got confused when looking at the promo for next episode. Silly CW confused me because it says it's a promo for episode 5. So I ran with that, and that's why I said episode 4. And this felt like a little bit more of a bridge episode to what we've been teased with for the promo of episode 5. I will get into that a little bit right at the end. Not so much happened in between it, but for sure towards the very, very, very end, and I really want to talk about that. Regardless, interesting episode. Can't wait to see what you guys have to say about it down in that comment section below. But let's recap the events of the episode, go over some of the details, and then I'll give my overall review at the end. Would really appreciate you guys if you left a like on the video. We pick up with Lois in the kitchen with the boys talking about going to her chemo, but really, really wanting to go to the Valentine's Day dance as well. This was kind of a big thing for Lois this episode, which factors into obviously her treatment, also factors into this somewhat multifaceted situation surrounding her health and how it obviously doesn't just affect her but other people. So we also explore Clark's side of that, and it kind of has like a nice, not necessarily a nice it does have a nice resolution at the end with the whole dancing scene, but her also, talking to Clark saying, look, if there's things that you think I might not want to hear, but you have an opinion, I want to hear it anyway. So that was a nice journey this episode with regards to this very serious storyline. It never ceases to amaze me, the performances of Elizabeth Tulloch and Tyler Hoechlin. They get pretty deep, and actually I feel like this episode consistently throughout was like pretty sad. But of course this takes us to Bruno Mannheim's facility, because we can't forget that Lois has transferred a treatment from the previous place to this place, which is kind of risky to do. Also, Sam Lane expresses that with regards to the priority being about beating this thing and not poking around in Al Capone's vault. And that's exactly what Lois does, because she wants to try and find or get access to Dr. Hook's files during her treatment. And Clark wants to be the one investigating, but she thinks that being a patient here could allow her to move around a bit more freely. But in my head, I was like, but Clark's got super speed, but at the same time, he isn't necessarily the Flash. So if he did have to stand still for a moment, then that would have made things a little bit awkward, and it wouldn't have given us that scene really between what we got later with Bruno Mannheim and Lois. But while Lois was off investigating, we had this whole other story for Clark in where he was talking with other patients getting their treatment, and they ask how he's doing. They share some of their own stories about, how they've gone through remission, or in fact how one of them have lost their daughter to cancer as well. And not that Clark isn't aware of the severity of this situation, but reality is somewhat slapping him in the face even more here. And again, it's not like he doesn't know the severity of it, but I do think that this will contribute to him feeling even more powerless, especially with the little teasers that we get for the promo of next episode. And one cool thing, again, full circle with this plot, this episode, is seeing Lois take that into account right at the end of the episode of when they're getting ready to go to the dance. But meanwhile, with Lois, she is poking around, she steals an ID, and she starts searching up Henry Miller, and then none other than Bruno Mannheim walks in. Like, oh damn, that's probably the last person she was expecting, but obviously he was aware that she was being treated here. This leads to quite a bit of a confrontation, obviously, with them having a go at each other a little bit. Lois saying that, you have Superman's blood, you're having Dr. Hook somehow use this blood to make powered people. Naturally, Bruno Mannheim kind of is like, don't have anything to do with this. All I'm doing here in this facility is saving people's lives. So he does often deny all of this. I mean, after all, we've seen the bad things that he can do, like almost blow up John Henry Irons' sister or doppelganger's sister. So he's not an innocent guy. But what I will say about this scene between Lois and Bruno is that I do feel like it gives a bit of a multifaceted side to him, and how I actually believed him when it came down to the final moments, and how he will do everything he can to save her life. And true, is probably to kind of stop her from sniffing around. But this cutting edge research that he's got, when he said, if you want something to write about, check this out. And this could be potentially helpful in maybe, I don't know if they're going to go down this route, but maybe helping Lois's cancer treatment. I don't think they're going to go with anything as like cheap as a cure or anything like that. But since Bruno Mannheim has this whole like secret part with like proper cutting edge research on treatment, maybe it will give her a little bit more of a a decent fighting chance at going into remission. And, just adding all of this in with the backstory of his mother living next to this chemical waste plant they didn't know, and how this drove him to help people, albeit he went down quite a bit of a dark path at the same time. I wouldn't quite call him like a mega complex villain yet, but there is a bit more to him than just being like, here, I'm going to make power to people and just like he at least has a bit of a backstory here. He has some drive. He definitely has a lot of conviction and takes insult when it comes to people questioning what he wants to do for Metropolis. And that's what I mean. I do think he wants to do things that can help people, but at the same time, he's willing to do pretty bad things to do the good. So it's going to be very interesting to see what this storyline will mean for Lois going forward and Bruno Mannheim. Like, will she accept his help at one point? And will that start a whole bunch of drama between Clark and maybe Sam Lane and be like, are you crazy? Why are you accepting help from him? How can you trust him? I have no idea if it's going to go down that storyline, but I don't get why they would tease him trying to do anything to save her life, so long as she doesn't snoop around as much, unless there wasn't going to be something about it. But meanwhile, with Natalie and Sam Lane, they're riding quad bikes. These two characters are blatantly a pair of which they're focusing on quite a bit this season with their dynamic. And granted that Natalie has been here for a while, she still hasn't really carved out a place for herself in this new world, doing things that normal teenagers do, reconnecting with family, where reconnecting is kind of a different grandpa, but you get the point. I do think that this story is very relevant for her, and I do think that Natalie and Sam Lane have some decent organic scenes. It's nice to see him have a different side of himself and try and connect with her, and her to feel like a bit more loved and secure in this whole new situation. Well, not so new, but a situation that she's dealing with. But this is where things almost get a bit funny, because we have Jordan turn up with Matteo, and Matteo was the guy that she met at the party, and things seemed to go sideways because they left, and it seemed like maybe they weren't gonna, get to know each other anymore. But no, he's back, and Sam Lane is very paranoid about this. It kind of made me think, man, what it must have been like for Lois Lane to grow up with boyfriends. But in other news, with the Langs, we have Lana having a meal with Sarah. They're talking about the upcoming dance, and that's when ex-mayor's kid, Junior, walks up, and this stirs a little bit of drama there, because he feels like she cheated in the election with her father. Don't act like you care. You didn't mention any of the good things that he did for Smallville and its people. So as this storyline continues, we have a bit of a plot with regards to Lana, ranting about this with Chrissy, and the whole decision of, should we expose Mayor Dean for the really, really shady things that he's done in Smallville? Granted, objectively, as they put it, he has done good, and to the people he has done good, but she has enough knowledge about him to really expose what a scumbag the ex-mayor was. And instantly as this was happening, though, I kind of knew the conclusion this would get to with regards to how distasteful this will be, given that he's dead now. It's like, are you really gonna expose through the Smallville? Because imagine if they did come out with this article, this is actually what Mayor Dean was like. I didn't have anything to do with this, because the people were kind of, suspecting, did Lana have anything to do with his death? It just would have looked really, really, really bad, and probably would have backfired. So thank God they didn't have that stroke of genius to submit that paper about exposing the mayor who's now dead, because that wouldn't look good. Now, as for Jonathan this episode, he has an interesting story, because he stops by Kyle on the road and offers him some help with the car. Now, this turns into a conversation about how he could use his help at the fire rescue station, and I actually really like that idea, because, if Jonathan has that job one day, it shows how brave and heroic he can be, even without having the need to be a literal Superboy. But the thing is, for good old Johnny Boy here, I swear things always get complicated for him. Candace reveals later on that she's going to move to her auntie's, which is 4 hours away, so they can only see each other on weekends. So he goes to Kyle later on and says something's come up, and the way it looks to him, I guess, is like a kid who's just like, I don't want it to cut into my weekends. So he's just like, well, you're going to have to decide what you want to prioritize more, which puts Candace and Jonathan in a bit of a rough place. But they didn't exactly split up. They just said, we'll figure out how to make this work. But clearly, things like that could fizzle out between them. I felt pretty bad for him, and Candace wasn't being petty about it at all as well, given that everything Jonathan has done for her, she doesn't want him to turn it down, the weekend work that is. So for now, it looks like that's where things are going with Jonathan's storyline, and I guess we're barely gonna see Candace anymore, because of course, she's gonna be like 4 hours away. So let me know if you think maybe if we see her again or hear of her again, it could be about Jonathan and Candace ending. But they did end it off by saying, I love you, and things seemed really cushy between them, so I don't know. Now, in other news, at the dance, we have Matteo cracking on with Natalie, and he goes in for a little kiss, and that kind of spooks her out. Now, this is where we get some more grandpa advice time. Again, not like major stuff going on here. I get how it's plot relevant to these characters. We have Sam Lane come over again. Pretty funny. If you want me to scare the hell out of Matteo, just say the word. But really, she is nothing personal to Matteo. She's just never had any experience with stuff like this. She feels so far behind other kids at her age, and he just gives her some nice advice. So just kind of cooking along that Natalie storyline even more. She says she loves her grandpa, so nice little wholesome ending to this little side story this episode. Now with Lana being in mayor mode, just saying to everyone at the dance, your school's gonna be fixed soon, so you can all get back to normal. We have Junior walk off, Sarah goes after him. Meanwhile, Kyle and Chrissy are having a good time, but Lana comes over to them and there's like an immediate body language change, and she asks where Sarah was, and now we'll get to that in a second, but this is where we have a bit of a moment with Kyle and Chrissy. Chrissy was about to leave, but Kyle didn't want her to go, so instead he goes up to the DJ. Now, for one moment, I thought it was going to be like a slow dance song, and he was just going to embrace, you know what, look, I'm not going to hide anything, let's just dance. But instead, he puts on a much more rapid beat that gets everyone involved. So it's kind of a screw it moment, let's just live. And initially, I thought this was going to be cheesy, but I'm not going to lie, I didn't actually find this as cheesy as I thought I was going to. I think it is because these two kind of want happiness and they clearly like each other. I'm not actually that invested in it, but again, this wasn't really a cheesy moment. I just kind of liked the let's live attitude between Kyle and Chrissy in this scene. But the thing is, then we go to a scene with Lana going to Sarah outside with Junior, and they're both drinking. Sarah's only literally had a sip, and Junior leaves, and this is when we have Lana saying, I can't believe you. After everything we've been through, you pull something like this, and instantly, I was just like, I sometimes defend Lana or just like say, look, I don't think it's as bad as what people are saying, but this is when I rolled. But thank God, seriously, it didn't go beyond this. It actually de-escalated very quickly, and she was just like, okay, I get it, just don't drink next time. But when there was that initial reaction, I think they knew what they were doing there. I was just like, no, don't do this. You are just gonna make this the most hated character on the show if Lana keeps acting this way. But luckily, it didn't happen. But I still feel like people are going to be a bit eye-rolly about that, even though the resolution of it was totally fine. But anyway, with Lois and Clark, they're getting ready for the dance, and this is where they start talking about, the different opinions on everything, and we kind of went over this earlier, but I want to get into the D.O.D. stuff, because I've totally forgot to mention that we had Bruno Mannheim working on a new test subject, and he was all suited and booted, and that is none other than Deadline. Now, Deadline, I believe, is a Starman villain, and as you could clearly tell this episode, he can phase, so I guess he's been injected with more of Superman's blood, and they sent him on a mission to go to the D.O.D. and steal some information on the D.O.D.'s top secret sites, just housing some of their top secret assets. Now, Clark gets suited up ready to go to the dance, but gets called away, and this turns into a pretty awesome fight. So, like, with everything kind of, slowly going along in the episode, some relevant things for the characters, this was very much so needed, I think, and it was a really cool action scene. I love how Superman just lays down the door, tore it off, and I was like, okay, let's go. The cool thing about this fight is that, given the phasing ability he has, it made it extremely difficult for Clark to combat. Clark was getting absolutely carved up by Kryptonite Shank. The only thing, a little bit of a nitpick here I have, is that the way it ended, not that it really mattered, so like nitpick aside, as you said, it's too late, Superman, like, job's done. It's just that when Deadline went for that final shank and Superman caught his hand, I felt like, why aren't you phasing? Because after that, yes, I'm aware that we had Superman after catching his arm, he then punched his torso, it sent his suit on the fritz, and then he was sent flying back with a clap. That's all awesome. I'm just saying, at that point, he wasn't on the fritz at all, and he kind of went like that, and it's like, well, if that was me, I'd phase again. It's just that the execution, given what we know and had seen in that whole scene so far of him phasing all the time, it wasn't really believable, because he could have phased, and that would have meant his torso wouldn't have been hit by Superman, and then his suit wouldn't have gone on the fritz, and then he wouldn't have got stuck in the wall. But I guess an argument could maybe be made that he could only be powered for so long, so that's why he couldn't phase in that moment. Either way, Clark gets back home. We have that scene between Lois and Clark that, again, we've kind of briefly spoken about, but I do want to just say that Elizabeth Tulloch, absolutely fantastic. I'm always going to sing her praises. The boys get home, and this just kind of ends in a really nice scene. Since they're all dressed up anyway, and Lois really wanted pictures of seeing everyone dressed up and dancing, Clark comes up with the idea of dancing in their living room there and then. We had this moment where Jordan shows Sam Lane this senior swipe dating app, which, I thought was going to be brushed off, but he kept on explaining it. So I guess that this means Sam Lane's going to go down this path. But anyway, end of the episode. Candace leaves, and we have Sam Lane come over to Lois and Clark saying that they need to talk, that this Deadline character managed to get the locations of their several facilities. Now, what did they take? Well, this is when the show, right at the end, cut to Bruno Mannheim saying that this is our new priority. And we have the doctor saying he looks just like him. And we find out what they took, and that is none other than Bizarro freaking Superman. So he's dead for now, but obviously with Superman's blood and whatever they've been doing to reanimate other people like Henry Miller, they believe that they can reanimate and bring back to life Bizarro Superman, and that is good. That was just so interesting. Again, I know certain things that they could be building up to, and I'm not going to mention stuff like that here, but I didn't necessarily think that it would be the Bizarro Superman, and I really liked Bizarro Superman, and I wasn't disappointed, but I was kind of gutted when he died, when he did in the previous season, just because he was such an interesting character. He turned out to be kind of nice by the end of all of it, so the fact he's going to be brought back and weaponized, and I assume his personality kind of altered, it's going to be certainly interesting. I think it's quite a power move on their part, because a lot of people liked Bizarro Superman last season, and the fact that he can be relevant to this storyline, I really do feel gives this season a bit of a pep in its step, with more things to look forward to. And we haven't even got to Lex Luthor yet, so again, things seem to be really solid each and every episode this season. Now, just before we get into the promo of the next episode, very briefly, I just want to say I really enjoyed this episode. As I said, it felt like a bit of a bridge. That's not negating what this episode still did for characters and pushing along some other things with Bruno Mannheim and Lois and what's going on there. Not to mention the very, very ending, of course. It's not like there was a whole bunch of stakes throughout and a whole bunch of action, but they did include action towards the end of the episode. It just felt like a bit more of a smoother episode, and thus kind of a bridge into what's happening next episode. And this is why I want to get into the promo, because it looks like it was really facilitating what we're going to see. So in the promo, we have Clark very much so struggling, and this is definitely about the whole situation with Lois, saying he feels very powerless. And it looks like a scene where Tyler Hoechlin's going to give it his all, because it looks like he's really starting to break down, and there's only so long as, not just Superman, but as any man or woman, that you can try and remain strong for until it really starts to affect you in this situation. So, the kind of depth that they're giving this storyline with Lois's illness for all characters is some really, really rich material. But the next interesting part that I found, which was featured, I believe, towards the beginning of the promo, is Jordan is getting more Superboy training lessons. He's getting a bit impatient with one lesson after another lesson and not really kind of graduating to something bigger and better, because as we all know, he can't quite handle it yet, as with what got featured earlier on in the season. Granted that he did seem to put out the forest fire and he got to take care of that himself, but that's not quite a crane or a building falling down as it did before. But Clark says this is the real world. It takes one mistake to lose everything. And it's true. Like, when you're a Kryptonian, Superman or whatever, if you do one thing wrong, this is why I big up Superman so much. Granted that he's pretty much invincible outside of few situations, he has to have a lot of smarts to execute a situation where several things could kind of be blowing up or putting people at risk at the same time. But as the trailer comes to a close, we have Lois saying, you need to go help him. And he's like, well, Dad said I wasn't ready. And she's just like, go save your father. And we see onomatopoeia there sending out the little freaking sound waves. and Clark screaming, his skin kind of rippling with the veins. It looks like there's some kryptonite stuff going on at the same time. So it looks like we're having Clark very much so in danger outside his storyline of struggling to be strong in this situation with Lois. And it looks like Jordan's going to really have to come in with Superboy mode to save his dad, which is where I'm hoping we're going to see the Superboy suit in action. So I do think we're going to get a very badass episode next week. Not to say, again, that this episode wasn't decent. I just feel like next episode we're going to, again, cross the bridge from this episode into a more, high-stakes one, and we're going to have a triumphant moment, I think, with Jordan in Superboy suited mode saving his father. But everyone, that's all from me this week, so let me know your thoughts about the episode down in the comments below. Any theories you have based off of the promo we just went over. If you want to support the channel, I'd really, really appreciate a like, especially if you've made it this far in the video. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to love you and leave you, so thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow Kryptonians in the next video. Goodbye.